My name is Arthur Blackwood, and I'm 65 years old. The story I'm about to tell you isn't about grief. It's about war. It all started 1 week after I buried my wife, the woman I'd shared 40 years of my life with. My son and daughter-in-law called a meeting about the inheritance. They sat across from me in the boardroom, the very room built with my sweat and my wife's soul, and laid out their demand. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, smiled with a coldness that could freeze hell over, telling me that now the old woman was gone, I would sign over the company to her husband and learn to fend for myself. I smiled back because what she didn't know was that my lawyer was about to walk in, not with a will, but with a single sealed envelope, a document that would unveil a 40-year-old secret and burn her entire world to the ground. If you believe loyalty is earned, not inherited, hit that like button and subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this ends. The appearance of Robert Sterling, my attorney, was like dropping a block of ice into a glass of whiskey. The already cold room turned glacial. Chloe shot him a look, a flicker of irritation crossing her perfectly made-up face. She hadn't anticipated him. This was supposed to be her ambush, a quick, clean strike against a grieving old man. Her voice was laced with sarcasm when she asked what a surprise it was to see Robert, that she didn't know this family meeting required legal counsel. I kept my voice flat, devoid of emotion, replying that this was not a family meeting, that she had just made that clear. This was business, and Robert was the company's lawyer. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, adding that he was always present for important business meetings. Robert gave a professional nod but said nothing. He set his leather briefcase by his chair but remained standing, a silent, imposing presence. He knew his role right then was to be a witness. My son, Ethan, shifted in his seat, looking deeply uncomfortable. He started to say, "Dad," what Chloe meant to say was, but Chloe cut him off without even looking at him, stating that what she meant was perfectly clear and he shouldn't complicate it. She turned her attention back. To me, her smile gone, replaced by the predatory stare of a corporate raider. She told me we should be practical. Eleanor was gone. The heart of this company was gone. People needed stability. The board, the investors, the employees, they needed to see a clear line of succession. Ethan had been the COO for 10 years. This was the logical next step. It was what Eleanor would have wanted, for the company she built to stay with her son. Her legacy. Her legacy. She dared to use that word. She dared to invoke Eleanor's name to justify her own naked greed. A surge of hot anger coiled in my gut, but I pushed it down. To get angry now was to lose. Eleanor had taught me that. Never let them see you sweat, she used to say. Let them see you think. I looked at Ethan, my son. I asked him if that was what he thought. If he thought his mother would want me to hand over everything she and I had bled for, just 1 week after her funeral. He swallowed hard, his eyes avoiding mine. He claimed he was just thinking about the company's stability, that people were worried. Mom always said family comes first. Yes, Eleanor always said family came first, but her definition of family was built on loyalty, respect, and hard work, not on a birthright disguised as laziness. I looked at the two of them sitting there in their expensive clothes in the mahogany-paneled boardroom that cost more than the first house Eleanor and I ever bought, and a memory hit me so hard it almost knocked the wind out of me. Eleanor and I, 40 years ago, on the floor of our tiny rented apartment, spreading bills out on the carpet, trying to figure out how to pay them all. I remembered the smell of truck grease that never seemed to leave from under my fingernails after a 16-hour day driving the one beat-up truck we owned, bought with a second mortgage on a house we could barely afford. Ethan's hands had never held anything heavier than a golf club. I took a deep breath, returning to the present. I asked Chloe softly why the rush. The question seemed to throw her. She was expecting a shouting match, not a simple, logical question. She snapped back that it wasn't a rush, a little too quickly. It was being decisive. The market doesn't wait for grief, Arthur. Our competitors will see your hesitation as weakness. We need a strong leader at the helm, not someone who's distracted. She said that last word with a sickening amount of fake pity. Distracted. I raised an eyebrow. I was burying my wife. That's not a distraction, Chloe. It's called being human. You should try it sometime. The tension in the room crackled. Ethan looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Chloe's eyes narrowed. The mask was slipping. She said I knew exactly what. She meant, "You're 65. You're tired. For the last few months, while Eleanor was sick, you let things slide at the company. Everyone saw it. The performance reports don't lie." And there it was, her trump card. She'd been gathering ammunition. She'd been planning this for months, waiting for the moment my wife took her last breath. The sheer coldness of it sent a chill down my spine. I stood up, planting my palms on the glossy surface of the table. I could feel the weight of 40 years in that wood. I've given my entire life to this. "Company," I said, my voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. I was here when it was one truck and a dream. I was here when we landed our first big contract. I was here when we nearly went bankrupt in the 2008 crash. And I was here holding the hand of the woman who built this with me during her last days, and I don't regret a single second of it. I locked eyes with Chloe. I am not going anywhere. I am the CEO and chairman of the board of Blackwood Logistics. Ethan will remain the COO. That is final. I turned to my lawyer. "Thank you for coming, Robert." It was a dismissal. Robert nodded and began packing his briefcase. Chloe shot up from her chair, her face flushed with rage. "You can't do this. The board—" I cut her off. "I own 51% of the voting shares, Chloe. I am the board. This meeting is over." A dead silence fell over the room. Chloe stared at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. Her confidence was gone, replaced by the raw fury of a predator who'd had its kill snatched away. "Fine," she hissed, her voice dripping venom. "Play it that way, old man. We'll see how long you last when the board sees your latest performance reviews. You're a relic, Arthur, and relics belong in a museum, not in the CEO's chair." With that, she spun around and stormed out, dragging a stunned and silent Ethan behind her. The slam of the door echoed in the silence. I was left alone in the vast, empty room. The grief for my wife, a weight I thought couldn't get any heavier, was now compounded by the bitter taste of betrayal. I sank back into my chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. Chloe was right about one thing. I was tired. But she was wrong about everything else. I was no relic. And this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a war. A war that Eleanor, in her own brilliant way, had already prepared me to win. I didn't go home after the meeting. I couldn't. The silence in that house, the house I'd shared with Eleanor for 30 years, would have been too loud. Instead, I drove to a small, dimly lit coffee shop in a part of town Chloe wouldn't be caught dead in. It smelled like old books and burnt coffee. It was perfect. I told Robert to start with any vendor or consultant who was hired without my direct approval, any new accounts opened in the last 18 months. I want to know who they're talking to, who they're paying. I leaned back, the vinyl of the booth creaking under my weight. Chloe thinks I'm a relic. She thinks I'm too lost in my grief to see what she's doing. I want you to use that. Let her think I'm weak. While she's planning her coronation, I want you to build her gallows. Robert simply nodded, writing it all down. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask if I was sure. 20 years as my lawyer, he knew how I operated. He knew when I gave an order like this, it was because the war had already begun. As I watched him take notes, my mind drifted. Eleanor's face appeared in my memory, as clear as if she were sitting across from me. I remembered a conversation we had about a year ago, sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset. I had just approved a new marketing initiative that Ethan and Chloe had proposed. I was proud of Ethan for taking the initiative, but Eleanor had been quiet, a small, thoughtful frown on her face. I had asked her what was wrong, my love. She had looked at me, her eyes that could see right through anyone, filled with a familiar concern. She said softly that it was Chloe. I don't trust her, Arthur. I had sighed. It was an old argument. She's ambitious, Eleanor. That's a good thing. She pushes Ethan. Eleanor had shaken her head slowly. It's more than ambition. She looks at Ethan and she doesn't see a husband. She sees a stock option. She looks at Blackwood Logistics and she doesn't see a family legacy. She sees a prize to be won. I had dismissed it at the time. I told her she was being too hard on her, that she was just being a protective mother. Now, sitting in that dingy coffee shop, her words echoed in my head with the force of a prophecy. She had seen it all. She had seen the vulture in Chloe, long before I did. I had been blinded by my love for my son and my desire for a peaceful family. Now I saw she wasn't being hard, she was being observant, and I had failed her by not listening. A wave of regret washed over me, so powerful it nearly took my breath away. But regret wouldn't win this fight. Robert looked up from his notepad, his expression serious. He said he would start immediately, that he would be discreet. They won't see it coming. I gave him a grim nod. Good, I said, my voice harder than I intended. Make sure of it. This was for Eleanor. I would not let the woman who saw my son as a stock option inherit the empire my wife had helped me build. I would protect her legacy, even if it meant tearing my own family apart to do it. 3 days passed in a haze of forced normality. I went to the office, signed papers, sat in meetings, and nodded at projections on a screen that meant nothing to me. Every face I saw was a question. Was this person loyal? Did they know what Chloe and Ethan were planning? The whole company, my life's work, suddenly felt like a hostile country. I slept in my home office, on a leather couch that smelled of old paper and Eleanor's faint perfume. I couldn't bear our bedroom. Not yet. On the 4th day, my phone rang. A private number. It was Robert. His voice on the other end was stripped of all warmth, a flat, sterile instrument of facts. He told me he'd found something, Arthur, and it was bad. I sat up straight, my heart starting a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. I asked how bad, my own voice a rough whisper. I heard the rustle of papers on his end. He explained it was a shell corporation, registered in a favorable tax jurisdiction. Of course, it was called C&E Consulting LLC, Chloe and Ethan. The arrogance of it was like a slap in the face. They didn't even try to be clever. They were so sure I was a spent force, a sleeping lion they could rob without fear. My hand tightened on the phone, the plastic groaning in protest. Go on, I said through gritted teeth. Robert laid it out with the cold precision of a surgeon dissecting a tumor. For the past 22 months, C&E Consulting had been submitting monthly invoices to Blackwood Logistics. The charges were for vague, intangible services, market trend analysis, supply chain optimization reports, logistics strategy advisement. Each invoice was for an amount just under the threshold that would require my personal signature, an amount that Ethan, as COO, could approve on his own. My own son. He was the key that unlocked the vault. Robert continued. The reports they supposedly provided don't exist. I checked with the department heads. They've never heard of C&E Consulting. They never received any such analysis. These were ghost services, Arthur. Just a pipeline to drain money from the company. I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea rolling through me. It wasn't just greed. This was a deep, meticulous, long-term deception. While I was taking Eleanor to chemotherapy appointments, while I was holding her hand as she slept, They were writing fake invoices. They were stealing from her. From us. "How much, Robert?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to know the number. I needed to know the exact price of their betrayal. There was a pause, and I could hear him take a breath. "The total amount paid by Blackwood Logistics to C&E Consulting over the past 22 months, he said, each word a hammer blow, is $1,812,450. The number hung in the air, obscene and monstrous. Over $1.5 million. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful, of Eleanor, looking over a quarterly report about a year ago. She had a small frown on her face. "This consulting fee seems high, Arthur," she had said, pointing to a line item. I had glanced at it, saw Ethan's signature and dismissed it. "That's that new efficiency firm Ethan hired," I told her. "He says they're worth every penny." The shame of that moment burned in my throat now. She had seen it. Of course she had. She saw everything, and I hadn't listened. I asked Robert where the money went, my voice now cold as steel. The grief in my chest was beginning to crystallize into something harder, something sharper. Robert said the C&E account was registered to a P.O. box, but he'd traced the outflows, large wire transfers. One was a down payment on a vacation home, an exclusive chalet in Aspen. Another paid in full for a brand new Porsche 911. The car is registered in Chloe's name. A house in Aspen, a Porsche. They weren't just stealing to build a nest egg. They were living a fantasy life on a foundation of lies, bankrolled by the company their mother had given her life to build. They were laughing at us. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. "I want more, Robert," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is a good start, but I want it all. I want to know where every single penny went. I want the deed to the house, the title to the car, the credit card statements linked to the account. I want a timeline of every purchase they made with that stolen money. Get it all." He replied that he was already on it, Arthur. "Consider it done." I hung up the phone and stood there for a long time, watching the city breathe below me. The grief was still there, a cold stone in my chest, but now it had a new companion. A cold, clear, righteous anger. The rules of engagement had changed. This was no longer a boardroom dispute. This was a crime scene, and I was done being the victim. The $1.5 million was a body blow, but it wasn't the knockout punch. It was ugly, a straightforward case of embezzlement, but it felt incomplete. It felt like a symptom of a deeper disease. Chloe was greedy, yes. Ethan was weak, yes. But Eleanor had been suspicious before the stealing got this bad. I remembered her frown a year ago. She wasn't just concerned about consulting fees. She was concerned about something more fundamental. The money explained Chloe's motive, but it didn't explain Eleanor's deep, quiet fear in her final months. I needed to understand what Eleanor knew, and Robert, with all his financial trackers, couldn't find that. There was only one person left who had been inside that room with us, someone who had seen the unfiltered truth of our family's last days, Mrs. Gable, Eleanor's private nurse. I found her at her neat little brick house on a street full of families. It was a world away from the cold glass and steel of my downtown office. I found her in her small, immaculate garden, tending to her roses. When she saw me, her eyes, usually so bright, filled with a deep sadness. She was a woman in her 60s with a kind face etched with laugh lines, but now those lines just seemed tired. She wiped her hands on her apron and came to me, pulling me into a hug that felt more real than any I'd received in weeks. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice thick, "I'm so sorry for your loss." She was a light. We sat on her small porch, drinking chamomile tea she insisted on making. For a few minutes, we just talked about Eleanor, not the CEO, not the matriarch, but the woman who loved cheap detective novels, the woman who hummed off-key when she was concentrating. the woman who knew all of Mrs. Gable's grandchildren's names and asked about them every day. She adored you, Mrs. Gable, I said, my own voice rough with an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in days. You were more than her nurse. You were her best friend. Mrs. Gable's eyes welled up. She dabbed at them with a tissue. And she was mine, she whispered, in those last months. We talked about everything, life, death, our children. She looked up, her gaze suddenly sharp. She was so proud of you, Mr. Blackwood, of how you built everything from nothing. But she was worried. My heart quickened. This was it. Worried? I prompted gently, not wanting to scare her. About what? Mrs. Gable hesitated, twisting the tissue in her hands. She looked down at her lap. She made me promise not to say anything. She didn't want to cause you any more pain. You were already carrying so much. Mrs. Gable, I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table between us. Whatever it is, I need to know. Chloe and Ethan are trying to take the company. They're saying I'm not fit to run it. They're saying it's what Eleanor would have wanted. Mrs. Gable's head shot up, her sadness replaced by a sudden, fierce anger that took me by surprise. What? She gasped. That's a lie, a wicked lie. She clutched the cross around her neck. She was worried about them. She was worried about what they would do after she was gone. She was breathing hard now, her loyalty to Eleanor overriding any promise of silence. She changed in the last couple of months, Mr. Blackwood. She became withdrawn. She started having private calls with her lawyer, Mr. Sterling. She'd make me leave the room. She had me bring her old boxes from the attic, company papers, ledgers, things from years and years ago. I thought she was just reminiscing. Mrs. Gable's eyes filled with tears again. But she wasn't reminiscing. It was an investigation. She would stay up late with her magnifying glass, poring over these old documents. She would get so tired, but she wouldn't stop. She kept muttering, "It doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up." My blood ran cold. She had been investigating them while she was dying. She was using the last of her strength to find the truth she sensed, but couldn't yet prove. And, I pressed, did she find what she was looking for? Mrs. Gable shook her head, her face a pale mask of confusion. I don't know. She never told me. But there is one more thing. She stood up, her expression suddenly fearful, as if she were breaking a sacred oath. She made me promise. Mrs. Gable said if anything happens, if move against him, and if Arthur ever needs to know the whole truth, I want you to give him this. She went inside her small house. I could hear her moving around, opening a drawer, her footsteps hesitant. She came out a moment later, her hand clenched tightly. She opened it and placed a single, small, tarnished key on the table between us. It wasn't a house key. It looked like a key for a safe deposit box. She told me, don't give it to him unless he's in trouble. He'll be in pain. I don't want to add to it if I don't have to. But if he needs to fight, this will be his shield and his sword. Those were her exact words, Mr. Blackwood. I stared at the key. It was so small, so insignificant, but I could feel the weight of it, the weight of my wife's love and her foresight. She hadn't just been suspicious. She had been planning. She had been laying a path for me, a set of breadcrumbs to follow from beyond the grave. The 1.5 million was just the beginning. This key was the real story. Mrs. Gable whispered that she said you would know where it belongs. She said it was from an old box she kept at Central National Bank, a box she opened before you were even married. I picked up the key, its cold metal biting into my palm. A box from before our marriage, a secret Eleanor had kept for over 40 years. The fight wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a truth Eleanor had died protecting, and I was about to dig it up. Thank you, Mrs. Gable, I said, my voice thick. You have no idea what you've done. She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. God bless you, Mr. Blackwood. Now go and fight for her. The next morning I was at Central National Bank, right as they opened. The key felt heavy in my pocket, a small piece of metal holding the weight of a lifetime. I was led by a severe-looking woman in a navy blue suit into the vault. The air was cold, sterile and silent, broken only by the sound of our footsteps on the marble floor and the mechanical click of the massive circular vault door. She led me to a wall of brushed steel boxes and indicated a small one near the bottom. "This is box 31B, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. It was opened in 1979, before I met Eleanor. A cold dread washed over me. What had she been hiding from me from the very beginning? I was left alone in a small private viewing room, just me, a desk, a chair, and the heavy, cold metal box. My hands were trembling slightly as I pulled out the tarnished key. It fit perfectly. I inserted my own bank key, turned both, and heard a satisfying, dull thud. The lock was open. I pulled the long, narrow box from its slot. It was heavier than I expected. I set it on the desk and just stared at it for a moment. This was the sword and the shield, the whole truth that Eleanor was so afraid to burden me with. I lifted the lid. There was no velvet lining, no gleaming jewels, no bundles of cash. It was just filled with paper, old and yellowed, smelling of dust and time. My eyes scanned the contents, my heart hammering in my chest. On top was a small, faded photograph of a young Eleanor, one I had never seen before, looking beautiful but impossibly sad. Beneath it, a packet of letters tied with a faded silk ribbon, and under those, 2 official-looking documents. I picked up the first one. It was a birth certificate. My breath caught. The name on it was Ethan Blackwood, my son. I ran my finger down the lines, past his date of birth, to the space for the parents' names. Father, Arthur Blackwood. And then I looked at the line for the mother. The name written there in crisp, typewritten ink was not Eleanor. It was a name from a life I had buried 45 years ago, a name I never thought I would see again. My blood turned to ice. It made no sense. And then I saw the second document. It was a set of adoption papers dated 6 months later, legally transferring all parental rights of the child, Ethan Blackwood, to one Eleanor Chenoweth. At the bottom of the box, almost hidden, was a small, leather-bound journal. I recognized Eleanor's handwriting on the first page, but it was the looping, hopeful cursive of a young woman I had just started to fall in love with. The fraud, the $1.5 million, it all evaporated from my mind. This was the real secret, and I was about to read it in her own words. My hands shaking, I opened the small, leather-bound book. The first page was dated April 10th, 1983, just 2 months before we were supposed to be married. I started to read, and my world tilted on its axis. "I found out today," she wrote. "Arthur. My Arthur, the man I'm going to build my life with, had a moment of weakness, a mistake, a stupid, drunken mistake 9 months ago that I could have forgiven. I could have screamed and cried, and we would have gotten through it. But it's not just a mistake anymore. That mistake has a name. His name is Ethan. He has a son with a woman from his past. A woman he swore meant nothing. A woman who showed up on his doorstep today holding a baby." I had to stop. My breath caught in my throat. I remembered that day, the sheer animal panic. I had told Eleanor about it, but I hadn't told her everything. I had told her it was a lie, a shakedown. I had lied to her. I read on, my shame a physical weight in my chest. He lied to me. The next entry read, a few days later. The ink was darker, pressed harder into the page. He stood in our kitchen and lied to my face. He said she was desperate, that the child wasn't his, but I saw his eyes. Arthur is a terrible liar. I knew he was telling me what I wanted to hear, not what was true. So I did something I'm not proud of. I followed him. I followed him to a run-down apartment complex on the south side. I watched him hand her a wad of cash, and I saw her. The mother. She was broken, thin, with eyes so hollow they looked like holes in her face. And then I saw the baby, him, just a tiny little thing in a dirty blanket. He wasn't just a mistake, he was a person, a small, innocent person. He's his son. He's Arthur's son, and he's being raised in a place with no hope. I haven't slept in 3 days. The lie is sitting between us at the dinner table, but it's not the lie that's keeping me awake. It's the baby's face. I can't get it out of my head. My vision blurred. I had to wipe my eyes. I never knew she'd done that. I thought I had handled it, paid the woman off, and she had disappeared. I was a fool, a young, arrogant fool. The next entry was a week later. I confronted him today. I told him I knew Ethan was his son. I have never seen a man break like that. He just fell apart right in front of me. He confessed everything. The shame, the stupidity, the fear. He was terrified of losing me, and in that moment, seeing him so broken, my anger just evaporated. It didn't disappear, it just changed. It became a terrible, heavy sadness, because I had a choice to make, a choice that would define the rest of my life. I could leave. I could walk away from this man I loved, this man who had betrayed me, and I would be justified. Everyone would say I did the right thing, or I could stay. I could forgive an unforgivable act. I could raise another woman's child as my own. I went to see her again, the mother. Without Arthur, I went and I talked to her. She doesn't want him. Not really. She wants money. She wants a different life. She looked at this beautiful baby boy, and all she saw was a millstone around her neck. And in that moment, I knew. He wasn't her son. He was mine. I made my decision today. I sat Arthur down. I told him my terms. We will adopt the child. We will pay the mother. And she will sign away her rights and disappear forever. And Ethan will be our son, my son. We will raise him and love him and give him the life he deserves. But there is one condition, my one unbreakable condition. He will never, ever know the truth. He will never know he is the product of my husband's greatest shame. He will only know that he is my son and that I love him. I'm not doing this for Arthur. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for the child. I am building our family on a foundation of forgiveness. I will make this our strength, not our weakness. I will love this boy so fiercely that the lie becomes the truth. He will be my son. The pages that followed were a blur of legal meetings, adoption papers, and then joy. An entry about his first steps, his first word, Mama. She had circled it, underlined it 3 times. The journal was filled with her love for him, a love so pure, so absolute, that I had never, not for a second in 40 years, doubted it. She hadn't just adopted him, she had claimed him with a love more powerful than blood. I read for an hour, my hands tracing her handwriting. Near the end, there was an entry from just 5 years ago, after Ethan and Chloe's wedding. Chloe. I don't know about this girl. There's something hard about her, something calculating. I see the way she looks at Ethan, not with love, but with ambition, like he's a stepping stone. It worries me. He's a good boy, my boy, but he's soft. He's never had to fight for anything. I've made sure of that. Maybe I made him too soft. Maybe by protecting him from the truth, I forgot to teach him how to see it in others. I closed the book, my body trembling, not with anger, but with a deep, transcendent awe. The woman I had loved for 40 years, the woman I had mourned for a week, was a giant. Her capacity to love, to forgive, was something I couldn't even comprehend. She hadn't just forgiven my betrayal, she had taken my greatest shame, my deepest secret, and transformed it into our family. She had built our entire life on an act of impossible grace. And now the very son she had saved, the son she had loved as her own, was siding with a woman who wanted to destroy everything she had built. The theft, the $1.5 million, it was all layered on top of this. A betrayal of a sacrifice I never even knew she'd made. I sat there in the cold, silent vault, holding the journal to my chest, and for the first time since her funeral, I wept. I wept for her strength. I wept for my own blindness, and I wept for the son I was about to lose. I spent the next 2 days in a daze. The world outside my window moved on, but I was trapped, reading my wife's words over and over. Her journal sat on the mahogany desk in my study, a silent testament to a 40-year act of love. I would pick it up, trace her script with my fingers, and try to understand the scale of her sacrifice. The house no longer felt just empty. It was haunted by the ghost of a truth I never knew existed. The doorbell rang on the 3rd night, a sharp, impatient sound that cut through my quiet contemplation. I knew who it was before I even looked at the security camera. I opened the door, and Chloe pushed past me without a word, her face a mask of thunder. Ethan followed behind her, looking like a teenager who'd been dragged to the principal's office. She demanded to know what the hell this was, turning to face me in the foyer, not even bothering with a greeting. My corporate card was declined at the department store. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that is?" Ethan, looking miserable, chimed in, saying, "Dad, some of my accounts are frozen. And 2. Robert's office sent a memo. We can't approve the purchase of the new fleet. We can't even approve payroll for the West Coast Logistics Department." "What is going on?" Chloe sneered, stepping closer. "This is your little game, isn't it? You lost in the boardroom, so now you're going to burn the whole company down out of pure spite. Is this your grand plan, to run Blackwood Logistics into the ground just so we can't have it? Eleanor would be sickened by what you're doing to her memory." I just looked at them. I listened to their shrill accusations, and I felt nothing. The anger I should have felt, the rage at their audacity, simply wasn't there. It had been burned away by the truth in that journal, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. I didn't see them as villains, but as children. Ignorant children playing with matches in a house soaked in gasoline. I let her finish her tirade, letting the ugly words hang in the air between us. When she finally ran out of breath, I slowly turned my gaze from her and looked directly at Ethan. My son. The boy Eleanor had loved so fiercely. She reshaped her entire life. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet, but it seemed to command all the air in the room. "I'm just protecting your mother's legacy." Chloe let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Her legacy is the company, you senile old man." I didn't look at her. I didn't even acknowledge she had spoken. I kept my eyes locked on Ethan. "Her entire legacy," I repeated slowly, letting each word land with its own weight. "The parts you know about and the parts you don't." I let the silence stretch. Then I delivered the blow, a question. "That was also a weapon. Are you sure you know what that legacy is, son?" The effect was instantaneous. It was like I had spoken in 2 different languages at once. Chloe's face contorted, first in confusion, then in pure rage. She demanded to know what that was supposed to mean, telling me to stop speaking in riddles, asking what I was hiding. But Ethan didn't hear her. He just stared at me, his face suddenly pale. The word legacy had hit him in a way it couldn't hit Chloe. To her, it was a synonym for money and power. To him, it was about his mother, the woman who had read to him every night, the woman who had nursed him through the flu, the woman whose funeral he had just attended. My question had bypassed his greed and struck something deeper. A flicker of genuine doubt crossed his face. He was thinking about his mother, really thinking about her, and he was realizing he didn't have an answer to my question. I held his gaze for a moment longer. "The accounts are under a temporary administrative review," I said, my voice now shifting to the cool, detached tone of a CEO. "It's a standard procedure recommended by legal counsel to protect company assets during a period of leadership transition. It's just business." I turned and began walking back toward my study. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a great deal of work to do. I left them standing there in the foyer, Chloe fuming and speechless, Ethan looking lost and utterly confused. I didn't need to show them the door. The power in the room had shifted completely and irrevocably. They hadn't come here and cornered a grieving widower. They had walked into a minefield they didn't even know existed. And I had just shown them the first tripwire. The psychological upper hand I gained in the foyer was a foothold, but I knew Chloe wouldn't back down. She was like a cornered snake. She would only become more venomous. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to set the trap. The next morning I sent the email. It was a work of art in corporate warfare. Brief, cold, and utterly official. It was a summons for an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors of Blackwood Logistics to be held in 24 hours. The agenda item was listed simply as Review of Executive Operational Conduct and Fiduciary Responsibilities. It was a declaration of war. I could picture Chloe reading it, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. She would see it as a sign of weakness, the last desperate move of a cornered king. She would think I was foolish enough to fight her on her own turf, in front of the very people she had likely been poisoning against me for months. She would spend the next day preparing her arguments, gathering her performance reports, ready to paint me as an emotional, grieving relic unable to lead. She was preparing for a boardroom fight. She had no idea she was walking into an execution. The morning of the meeting, I chose my suit carefully. A dark grey suit Eleanor had bought for me on our 35th anniversary. She said it made me look powerful. Today, I needed that power. As I knotted my tie, I didn't see a tired, grieving man in the mirror. I saw a soldier. I wasn't dressing for a meeting. I was putting on armor. I was in the boardroom an hour early. I watched them on the security feed as they walked through the lobby of the building I had built. Chloe led the way, her stride quick and confident, a shark gliding through familiar waters. She was smiling, nodding at employees, playing the part of the queen-in-waiting. Ethan walked half a step behind her, his expression a familiar mix of anxiety and borrowed arrogance. He looked like a man being led into a battle he wasn't sure he could win, but was too afraid to question his general. When they entered the boardroom, the low chatter from the other 4 board members died instantly. I was already seated at the head of the table. My seat. Robert was at my right, his briefcase open, a neat stack of 6 thick, spiral-bound folders placed precisely in front of him. Each folder was a nail for their coffin. Chloe's confident smile faltered for just a fraction of a second as she took in the scene. The room was cold, the atmosphere sterile. This wasn't the chaotic, emotional confrontation she had prepared for. This was a clinical, organized proceeding. She looked at me, a question in her eyes. I met her gaze with a calm, unreadable expression. She and Ethan took their seats. They thought they were here for a coup. They didn't know it yet, but the meeting wasn't a debate. It was a sentencing. I let the silence in the room stretch for a full 10 seconds. I looked down at the polished table, then slowly raised my eyes. I looked at each board member one by one. Mr. Ramsey, who had been my first driver and now ran our entire West Coast operations. Helen, our CFO for 20 years, a woman so sharp she could find a rounding error in the federal budget. David and Thomas, 2 of our earliest investors who had believed in Eleanor and me when we were nothing. These weren't just board members, they were family, or so I had thought. Finally, I looked at Chloe. "You wanted this meeting," I began, my voice quiet but firm. "You've been telling people I'm not fit to lead, that I'm distracted, that I'm a relic. You think it's time for a change. So please, Chloe, the floor is yours. Tell us all what you think. It was a trap." She swam right into it. She straightened her spine, gave a practiced, sympathetic look to the other board members, and launched into her prepared speech. "Thank you, Arthur, and I want to say, we are all grieving with you. Eleanor was the heart of this company. That's why this is so difficult. She proceeded to lay out for nearly 10 minutes a case built on half-truths and corporate buzzwords. She pointed to missed meetings I had missed to be at Eleanor's bedside. She highlighted delayed decisions I had postponed to focus on my wife's final days. She painted a picture of a company adrift, led by a man lost in the past, a man who had lost his edge. "We need a strong, clear-eyed leader to guide us forward," she concluded, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Ethan's arm. "Ethan has the vision, he has the drive, and it is what Eleanor would have wanted." The room was heavy with the implication. The other board members looked uncomfortable, glancing at me, then down at their notes. Ethan sat there, preening under her praise. A puppet king. Chloe smiled, triumphant. She thought she had won. She thought the debate was about my competency. I let her smile hang in the air for a moment. Then I turned to Robert. "Robert," I said, my voice cutting through the tension, "you have the floor." Chloe's smile vanished. "What? What is this?" "This is a board matter, not a legal one. This," I said, leaning forward, "is entirely a legal matter." Robert stood. He opened the 6 thick folders. "Good morning," he said, his voice as neutral as a judge's. "I have prepared a report for each of you. This is the result of a 2-week internal audit commissioned by the CEO." He slid a folder in front of each board member, gave one to Ethan, gave one to Chloe. "If you'll please turn to page 1. And I would also direct your attention to the main screen." The projector flickered to life. The first image was a simple logo, a stylized D and J intertwined. Underneath, the words C&E Consulting, LLC. Chloe's face went rigid. It was a fractional change, a tightening around her eyes, but I saw it. Ethan, however, went visibly pale. He looked at the screen, then the folder, then at me, his eyes wide with a dawning animal panic. "C&E Consulting," Robert began, "is a limited liability company registered in another region 22 months. Agoom." He clicked to the next slide. It was the registration document. "The registered agents and sole proprietors," he continued, "are Chloe Blackwood and Ethan Blackwood." Helen, our CFO, let out a small, sharp gasp. "Robert, what is this?" "Please turn to page 3, Robert said, his voice unwavering. "What you are looking at is the first of 22 invoices submitted by C&E Consulting to Blackwood Logistics. The screen filled with an invoice for $45,000. The service rendered, Logistics Strategy Advisement. As you'll note," Robert said, "the amount is just below the $50,000 threshold that requires CEO approval, an amount that can be approved solely by the Chief Operating Officer." He clicked. "The next invoice, $42,000. Market Trend Analysis. Click. Supply Chain Optimization." Click. Click. For 5 solid minutes, Robert clicked through invoice after invoice, all for vague, intangible services, all signed and approved with Ethan's digital signature. "Mr. Ramsey," Robert said, looking at our head of operations, "did you ever receive a supply chain optimization report from C&E Consulting?" Ramsey shook his head, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "Never heard of 'em," he growled. "Helen," Robert turned to our CFO, "did our marketing department receive any market or trend analysis from this entity?" Helen was already flipping through her own copy of the report, her face pale. "No," she said, her voice shaking with rage. This is fraud." "But where did the money go?" asked Thomas, one of the investors. "Please turn to section 4, Robert said. "The money trail. This was the kill shot." Robert projected a bank statement from C&E Consulting. It showed the inputs from Blackwood Logistics and then the outputs. "Exhibit A," Robert said, "a wire transfer for $250,000, dated March 12th of this year." He clicked. The next slide was a property deed. That transfer was a down payment on this, a 5-bedroom chalet in an exclusive area of Aspen. The property is deeded solely in the name of Chloe Blackwood. Chloe shot to her feet. This is an outrage. That was a legitimate real estate investment. This is private financial information. It was purchased with stolen company funds, Robert stated flatly, not raising his voice, which makes it company business. He clicked again. Exhibit B, a transfer for $160,000, dated June 1st. The next slide, a vehicle registration. Payment in full for a 2023 model Porsche 911. The vehicle is registered also in the name of Chloe Blackwood. Mr. Ramsey started to rise, his fists clenched. I put a hand on his arm, and he sank back into his chair, breathing like an angry bull. Chloe was losing it. Her face was flushed, her voice shrill. Those were performance bonuses, compensation for our consulting work. Ethan approved them. It's all perfectly legal. Was it legal, Mrs. Blackwood? Robert asked, his voice suddenly sharp. When you used the funds to pay off over $50,000 in personal credit card debt? He clicked again. Statements from luxury department stores, jewelry shops. And finally, Exhibit C. The remaining balance of the C&E consulting account, $402,000, was transferred 2 days ago, the day after our last meeting, into this high-yield private savings account. He projected the statement, jointly owned Ethan Blackwood and Chloe Blackwood. Robert let the image hang on the screen. Then he put up the final slide. It was just one number in a large black font, 1,812, 450, 1.8. David, the investor, was speechless. He just stared at Ethan. Ethan had completely crumbled. He wasn't even looking at the screen. He was white as a sheet, his hands visibly shaking. He looked like a child. He stammered that it was consulting, his voice cracking. Chloe said it was standard, a management fee. She handled all of that. You signed the approvals, Ethan. Helen's voice dripped with contempt. You signed every single one. Chloe, seeing her puppet fall, tried one last time. She pointed a trembling finger at me. He's doing this. He's twisting it. He's a vengeful old man, and he's trying to frame us because he's lost his mind. He's grieving. He's incompetent. All eyes turned to me. I'd been silent through the entire presentation. I sat there, letting her accusation hang in the air. I looked at the number on the screen, $1.5 million. I looked at my son, who couldn't even meet my eye. Then I looked at her, my daughter-in-law, her face a grotesque mask of rage and panic. I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table, and I spoke, my voice low, filled with a cold, clear sadness that was more terrifying than any yell. You're right about one thing, Chloe. I was grieving. I paused, letting the room hold its breath. Robert, can you go? Back to the timeline of the invoices, please. Robert clicked. The dates appeared. March, April, May, June, July. While my wife, I said, my voice dropping, was in a hospital bed learning she had weeks to live, you two were writing invoices for market trend analysis. I pointed to the April transfer. While I was holding her hand, listening to her tell me she was scared, you were wiring a down payment for your house in Aspen. I pointed to the June invoice. And in the week we brought her home for hospice care, the week I didn't sleep, the week I sat by her side and watched the strongest person I've ever known fade away. You were signing a check for your new Porsche. I stood up. The room was deathly silent. Even Chloe was speechless, her mouth half open, the blood draining from her face. I looked at Ethan. This, I said, my voice thick with a pain he couldn't possibly understand, is the legacy you were trying to protect. My words fell into a silence so profound it was like a physical weight. Every person in that room was frozen. Mr. Ramsey stared at his own clenched fists. On the table, his knuckles white. Helen had her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and utter disgust, fixed on Ethan. The investors just looked stunned, as if they couldn't process the sheer cold-bloodedness of the betrayal. Chloe was standing there, her power executive mask gone, replaced by the ugly, naked face of a common thief caught in the act. And Ethan, my son, finally looked at me, his eyes brimming with tears. He didn't look like a 40-year-old COO. He looked 5, a little boy who had just broken his mother's favorite vase and knew he was in terrible, terrible trouble. "Dad," he whispered, the word a pathetic squeak. I didn't know about the dates. She handled everything. I just signed. Chloe, seeing him fall apart, seemed to snap back to life, but her rage was gone, replaced by a desperate, frantic panic. She turned on him, her voice a venomous hiss. "You knew, you weak, pathetic fool. You knew. You loved the money. You loved the car I bought you. Don't you dare put this on me. I didn't, he cried, covering his face with his hands, openly sobbing now. I thought it was just bonuses. It was a pathetic, disgusting spectacle, a husband and wife tearing each other apart to avoid the guillotine. I had seen enough. Enough, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through their frantic whispers like a scalpel. They both fell silent. I looked at the board members. You have seen the evidence presented by Mr. Sterling. You have heard the testimony. The facts are clear. $1,812,450 of company funds were fraudulently transferred to a shell company owned by the chief operating officer and his wife. I turned my gaze back to Ethan, his face still buried in his hands. As chairman of this board, I now call for a vote. I will be making 3 motions. Ramsey slammed his open palm on the table, making the water glasses jump. "A vote," he growled, his face purple with rage. "To hell with a vote, Arthur. Let me throw them out myself. This is a disgrace to Eleanor's memory." "A disgrace, Ramsey," I said, holding up a hand. "Everything will be done by the book. Everything will be official. This is how we restore order." I looked at Helen. "Helen, do you have anything to say before we proceed?" She took a shaky breath, removing her hand from her mouth. She looked directly at Ethan. "I helped hire you, Ethan," she said, her voice trembling with a cold fury. "I watched you grow up. Eleanor was so proud of you. She bragged about you, about your MBA, about how smart you were." She shook her head, her eyes filling with angry tears. What you have done. It's not just theft, it's a desecration. You let this woman," she spat the word, glaring at Chloe, "lead you by the nose to steal from your own mother's legacy while she was dying. God, Ethan, how do you live with yourself?" Ethan just sobbed harder, his shoulders shaking. I stood tall. "Motion 1, I said, my voice ringing out. I move that the board immediately terminate the employment of Ethan Blackwood for gross misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and corporate fraud, effective immediately. Second the motion," Ramsey roared before I'd even finished the sentence. "All in favor," I said. Every hand in the room, besides Ethan's and Chloe's, shot into the air. "Opposed?" I asked the silence. Chloe just stared at me, her eyes dead. The motion passes unanimously. Ethan Blackwood is no longer an employee of Blackwood Logistics. No pause. Motion 2. I move that the board immediately and permanently ban Chloe Blackwood from all Blackwood Logistics properties and that all of her corporate accounts and access privileges be revoked, effective immediately. "Second," said Helen, her voice like ice. "All in favor." Again, every hand went up. The motion passes unanimously. Chloe looked like she'd been struck. She understood what I was doing. This wasn't just a firing, this was an excommunication. Finally, I said, "Motion 3. I move that the board authorize our legal counsel, Mr. Sterling, to pursue all available civil and criminal charges against Ethan Blackwood and Chloe Blackwood to recover the $1,812,450 plus damages, and to cooperate fully with the District Attorney's Office in their inevitable prosecution." Second, said Thomas, the investor, his face grim. All in favour. All hands went up. The motion passes unanimously. It was done. In less than 3 minutes, their lives, as they knew them, were over. Chloe was staring at me, her face a white mask of shock. The reality of what had just happened was crashing down on her. The money, the house, the car, the charges, prison. Ethan was still crying, a broken 40-year-old child. I pressed a small button on the console in front of me, calling the security desk in the lobby. "Robert," I said, "please give the evidence binders to the security officers when they arrive. They will be escorting Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood from the building." The door opened, and 2 uniformed security officers walked in. They were large men, and their presence suddenly made the room feel very small, very real. "Arthur, Dad, please," Ethan whispered, looking up at me, his face a mess of tears. "Please don't do this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at him, my son, the boy Eleanor had saved, the boy I had raised, and I felt a vast, empty ocean of pity and disgust. "Sorry doesn't bring back the money, Ethan," I said, my voice flat. "And it sure as hell doesn't honor your mother's memory. You made your choice. You signed the papers." I nodded to the guards. "They are no longer employees or guests. Please see them out." One guard stepped toward Ethan, the other toward Chloe. Chloe, in a final, pathetic burst of defiance, grabbed her purse. "You don't have to touch me, I'll walk," she spat, and she strode out of the room with her head held high, a queen in a fantasy of her own making, even in her absolute defeat. Ethan, however, couldn't even stand. The guard had to lift him gently but firmly by the arm. "Dad!" he cried out, one last desperate plea. I turned my back. I couldn't look at him. I faced the window, looking out over the city Eleanor and I had built. I listened as he was led away, his sobs echoing down the hall until the heavy boardroom door clicked shut, sealing them out of my life, out of their company, forever. The dismemberment was complete. After the heavy door clicked shut, the silence that flooded the boardroom was absolute. It was a vacuum, heavier and deeper than the quiet of my empty house. The other board members, Ramsay, Helen, David, and Thomas, had filed out quietly one by one, each placing a hand on my shoulder as they passed. They offered their support, their faces grim, their eyes filled with a shared sense of violation. Robert was efficiently packing the remaining folders into his briefcase, a quiet professional who had just detonated a bomb and was now clearing away the debris. But I just sat there at the head of the table that had been mine for 40 years. I stared at the empty chair where Ethan had sat, at the overturned water glass he had knocked over in his panic. I felt no triumph. There was no surge of victory, just a vast, cold emptiness and a bone-deep weariness. I looked at the number still glowing on the projector screen, 1,812,450. It was a massive sum, but it felt meaningless. I looked at the timeline of the invoices, March, April, May, June, and suddenly it all snapped into place, not as a random series of thefts, but as a meticulously laid trail of breadcrumbs. Eleanor. This wasn't my counteroffensive, it was hers. Every step I had taken in the past 2 weeks, I realized, I hadn't been walking alone. I had been following a map she had drawn for me. Her strange, secret calls to Robert in her final months. Her request to Mrs. Gable to bring her old ledgers and papers from the attic. Her casual throwaway comment a year ago about the consulting fees being high. Her warning, the one I had dismissed, that Chloe saw Ethan as a stock option. She had seen it. She had seen the rot long before I did. She knew she was dying. She knew I would be blinded by my grief. And she knew better than anyone that my love for Ethan was a weakness Chloe would exploit. So in the last precious months of her life, as her body was failing her, her mind, that brilliant, sharp, incredible mind, was working overtime. She wasn't just reminiscing over old papers. She was building a case. She was laying the groundwork. She was gathering the ammunition, putting it in a box, and leaving the key with Mrs. Gable. She was preparing me for the war she knew was coming, a war I would have to fight without her. Robert hadn't started from scratch with the evidence. He was just following the map she had left behind. She had cleaned up my mess one last time. She had armed me from the grave. I looked at her empty chair beside mine, and I finally understood. I wasn't avenging her. I was just finishing the job she had started. The call didn't come from me, it came from Robert. A week after the board meeting, a week of deafening, suffocating silence, he contacted their new and presumably very expensive lawyer. He proposed a meeting, a final opportunity, his email read, to discuss the terms of separation and the pending civil litigation. It was a perfectly baited trap, and I knew Chloe would swim right into it. I knew exactly how her mind worked. She was a transactional creature. To her, everything was a negotiation. She would see this as a lifeline. She would be convinced that I wouldn't actually want the humiliation of a public criminal trial. Father sues son for embezzlement. The headlines would be terrible for the company's brand. She would think I was coming to barter. I would trade my silence for her mercy. She would try to leverage her marriage to Ethan, her status as the mother of my grandchild, to avoid jail time and maybe, just maybe, walk away with some kind of settlement. She still thought this was about the $1.5 million. She still believed she had a card left to play. And Ethan would just be there. A hollow shell, dragged along by her desperate, frantic hope. Robert's office was on the 50th floor, a glass box of steel and grey marble that overlooked the river. It was nothing like my warm, wood-panelled office. This place was cold, sterile and impartial, the perfect, unforgiving stage for what was about to happen. I was already seated at the head of the long glass conference table when they were shown in. Robert sat to my right, his posture as rigid as the skyline behind him. The door opened. They looked diminished. The week had not been kind. Chloe's usual designer suit was replaced with something less sharp, something that looked off the rack. Her makeup was applied just a little too thickly, a brittle mask of defiance painted over a foundation of animal panic. Ethan was worse. He looked like a ghost. He was unshaven, his eyes were red and hollow, and he wouldn't look at me. He just shuffled in and collapsed into the chair furthest from me, as if trying to make himself small, to disappear into the expensive upholstery. Chloe, however, strode to the table and dropped her handbag onto it with a loud thud. "All right, Arthur," she said, her voice brittle, forcing a strength she clearly no longer possessed. "Have you had your fun, humiliated us, made your point? Are you finally ready to be reasonable?" She tried for a smirk. "What's the offer?" "We won't go to trial. We'll sign an NDA. We'll figure out a payment plan for the money. What does it take to make this go away?" I just looked at her. I felt nothing. No anger, no hatred, just a profound pity for her complete and utter blindness. She was still trying to haggle over the price of a used car, not realizing she was standing on a gallows. "There is no offer, Mrs. Blackwood," Robert said, his voice cutting through her bluster. "This is not a negotiation." Chloe's forced confidence wavered. "Then what is this?" she snapped, her voice rising in pitch. "A final chance to gloat? One last round of humiliation before you send your own son to prison?" I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. "This isn't about the money you stole, Chloe. That's a separate matter, a matter for the district attorney." I nodded to Robert, who placed a single new blue-bound folder on the table. "This is about the will." Her face, which had been a mask of false bravado, finally crumpled into raw, genuine confusion. The will. Eleanor's will was simple. We heard it was simple. Everything went to you. I looked at her, and for the first time, I think she saw the man I had become in the past 2 weeks. That, I said, is what you were meant to believe. Robert, please begin. Robert took a pair of simple, black-framed reading glasses from his pocket. It was a deliberate, methodical gesture, the kind of small action that suddenly commands the entire room. He put them on. He opened the blue folder. The sound of the thick, expensive paper turning was unnaturally loud in the pressurized silence of the office. He didn't look at Chloe. He didn't look at Ethan. He looked only at the document. "This," he began, his voice a flat, emotionless monotone, "is the last will and testament of Eleanor Chenoweth Blackwood. It was executed on August 14th of this year." Ethan, who had been staring at his own hands, looked up, his hollow eyes finally showing a flicker of confusion. "August," he whispered. That was 2 months before she—" Chloe's eyes narrowed. 2 months, she repeated sharply. "She signed a new will 2 months ago." I could see the gears turning in her head. She was recalculating. A new will, signed while she was sick. She was probably thinking Eleanor had cut me out or given everything to charity in a fit of emotion. Her mind couldn't even conceive of the truth. "This document," Robert continued, as if they hadn't spoken, "revokes all previous wills in their entirety. With your permission, I will skip the preliminary articles regarding the disposition of personal effects and move directly to the primary articles concerning the major assets." "Get to the point," Chloe snapped. Robert turned a page. Article 3. All personal liquid assets, including but not limited to all bank accounts, money market accounts and stock portfolios held solely in the name of Eleanor Chenoweth Blackwood, are bequeathed in their entirety to my beloved husband, Arthur Blackwood. Chloe let out a small, almost triumphant sigh of relief. She visibly relaxed in her chair. "See," she said, forcing a smile at Ethan. "It's the same. It all goes to Arthur. So what is this? What is the point of this drama, Arthur?" I said nothing. I just waited. I knew what was coming. Robert held up a single finger, a silent command for her to be quiet. "Please, Mrs. Blackwood, I'm not finished." His voice was a sliver of ice. "That was Article 3. We are now on Article 4. This article," he said, pausing, to look at her over his glasses, "concerns my client's controlling interest in Blackwood Logistics, specifically the 51% of voting shares she inherited from her father, Mr. David Chenoweth, and which are, as stipulated by her prenuptial agreement with Mr. Blackwood, her sole and separate property." Chloe's smile vanished. She cocked her head. Her separate property. I could hear the cold dread in her voice. The $1.5 million had been stolen from the company, but this was Eleanor's personal stake, a stake that by law was completely untouchable by me or Ethan. What about the company?" she stammered. Robert looked back down at the page. Article 4, Section A. "All aforementioned shares shall be placed into a newly formed entity upon my death to be called the Blackwood Legacy Trust." He read a dense paragraph of legal jargon outlining the structure of the trust, its trustees, its tax implications. Chloe was fidgeting, her panic mounting. "Get to the point," she nearly shouted. Robert turned the final page of the document. "I am at the point, Mrs. Blackwood. I'm at Article 4, Section B." He paused again, a long, agonizing silence. "It is," he said, "what my client referred to as the bloodline clause." "The what clause?" Chloe's voice was a high-pitched squeak. Robert raised his voice slightly, as if addressing a courtroom, and read, very slowly, enunciating every syllable. "The controlling interest of Blackwood Logistics, the aforementioned 51%, shall only be transferred in part or in full from the Blackwood Legacy Trust to an heir or heirs who can provide definitive biological and genetic proof of being of my direct bloodline." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Ethan just sat there, his face completely blank, The words didn't compute. He was too slow, too insulated from reality to grasp the implication. But Chloe was different. Her face was a storm of rapid-fire, conflicting emotions, confusion, fear, and then a sudden, dawning, desperate understanding. She looked at Robert, at me, at Ethan, and then she let out a short, barking, ugly laugh. A bloodline clause. What is this, Game of Thrones? That's just Ethan. It's just a legal, fancy, vengeful way of saying it goes to her son. Our son, she was nodding, reassuring herself. Right? Right, Arthur? She looked at me, desperate for confirmation. This is just another sick, twisted game. You're trying to scare us. She turned back to Robert. So what? You want a blood test? Fine. Bring a needle. We'll do it right now. Ethan is her son. He is her only son. This is meaningless. I just watched her. This rabid animal, still fighting, still clawing, still trying to make the facts fit her narrative. She was standing on a trapdoor and arguing about the color of the paint. I let her rant for another 10 seconds, her voice getting shriller, more hysterical. She still thought she was safe. She still thought the man sitting next to her, the man she had used as her key to the vault, was Eleanor's son. Robert just waited, his expression unreadable. When she finally ran out of breath, her chest heaving, he spoke in a dangerously quiet voice. As you wish, Mrs. Blackwood. He reached down to the briefcase at his feet, the one I had assumed was now empty. He pulled out a single, thick, sealed manila envelope, the same envelope I had seen in the boardroom. He placed it on the glass table with a soft, final thud. Mrs. Blackwood, he said, was a very thorough woman. She anticipated this contingency. She also anticipated the results. Chloe's laugh was high and brittle, a sound on the verge of shattering. Anticipated? What did she leave? An affidavit? A lock of his baby hair? This is insane. Ethan is her son. Robert's face remained an impassive mask. He didn't respond to her hysterics. He just, very deliberately, broke the seal on the manila envelope, reached inside, and pulled out a single folded document, a lab report. As I said, Robert continued, his voice cutting cleanly through her rising panic. Mrs. Blackwood was a very thorough woman. In her final weeks, she was concerned about the future of the company. She was concerned about discrepancies. She authorized, as part of her estate planning, a full genetic audit of her direct lineage. She provided her own sample, of course. He then turned his gaze, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, directly to Ethan. And Ethan, she requested a sample from you as well. Do you remember, about 3 months ago, when your mother insisted you get a full executive physical at the university hospital? She was so worried about your health. Ethan, who had been a ghost in the chair, blinked. My physical? With Dr. Evans? Yes. She said she was worried about my cholesterol. Indeed, Robert said, she was. She also, under a private medical directive, had the lab run a full comparative DNA panel against her own sample. She wanted to confirm her legacy, to ensure the bloodline clause was ironclad. Robert unfolded the paper. This, he said, holding it up, is the result of that comparative panel from the University Hospital's certified genetics lab. He didn't need to read the whole thing. He just read the summary, his voice flat, devoid of drama, which only made the words more devastating. Conclusion, he read. The sample provided by Mr. Ethan Blackwood and the sample provided by Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood show 0 common genetic markers consistent with a mother-son relationship. The probability of maternity is 0.0%. The world stopped. Ethan just stared, his mouth opening, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air, his mind completely unable to process the words. He looked at me, his eyes wide, begging me to say it wasn't true. Chloe's face went a complete and terrifying white. The quick calculations, the anger, the fear, it all vanished, replaced by a void. She looked from Robert to the paper to Ethan, and then to me. "What?" she whispered. It was the smallest, most terrified sound I had ever heard her make. "What does that mean?" I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the glass table, and for the first time I let the full weight of my grief, my betrayal and my pity show in my voice. "It means," I said, looking directly at her, "that he is not her son." But Chloe's mind was racing, trying to find a foothold. "But he's your son, so you had an affair." She was clutching at straws, trying to find a scenario that still made sense. "You cheated on Eleanor?" "Yes," I said, my voice a rough whisper. "I did. Once. A long time ago, before we were even married. A stupid, drunken mistake I made 45 years ago. I looked at Ethan, my son, whose entire world was disintegrating in real time. Your biological mother, she didn't want you. She wanted money. I paid her off. I thought that was the end of it. I turned. My gaze back to Chloe, whose face was now a mask of pure, horrified confusion. "But Eleanor," I said, my voice thick with an awe she could never comprehend. "Eleanor knew. She knew the truth, and she forgave me. She went, and she found him. She legally adopted him. She raised him. She loved him. My God, she loved him more fiercely than any mother I have ever known. She loved him as her own. She made him her son in every way that mattered. But, and here my voice turned to cold steel, she could not make him her. Blood, and her will, the will she wrote, is based on blood, not on love." The finality of it hit Chloe like a physical blow. She staggered back, clutching the table. "No," she whispered, "no. So he gets nothing? The company, he gets nothing. He gets nothing from her trust," Robert stated flatly. "Then who?" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical scream. "Who gets it? If it's not Ethan, then who? Did she have another child? A secret child?" Her laugh was a raw, broken sound. "This is insane. There is no one else." I just looked at her. I looked at my broken son, who was rocking back and forth, whispering, "No, no, no," to himself. I had dreaded this moment, dreaded this pain, but Eleanor had known. She had planned for this too. She had known that the truth, in all its devastating cleansing power, was the only way. "You're right, Chloe," I said, my voice quiet again. "He wasn't her only child." Chloe froze, her eyes locked on mine. "What?" The conference room door opened. It hadn't been locked. Robert had arranged this. A woman walked in. She was in her late 40s, maybe 42, 43. She was tall, with an air of quiet, professional confidence. She had dark hair, a kind, intelligent face, and my breath caught. She had Eleanor's eyes. The same shape, the same depth, the same penetrating intelligence. She wasn't dressed in a power suit, but in the practical, no-nonsense green medical scrubs of a doctor, a white lab coat over them, a stethoscope around her neck. She looked like she had just come from a hospital floor. She glanced at me, at Robert, and then at the two broken people at the table, her expression one of polite, professional curiosity mixed with a deep underlying sadness. Chloe just stared at her. "Who the hell are you?" "This is a private meeting." Robert stood up. "Chloe Blackwood, Ethan Blackwood," he said, his voice taking on a formal introductory tone. "Allow me to introduce Dr. Evelyn Reed. She's a double-board certified cardiothoracic surgeon currently on staff at a prestigious university hospital in another city." He paused, letting the name, the title settle in the air. Then he delivered the final blow. "She is also," he said, gesturing to the doctor, "the biological daughter of Eleanor Chenoweth Blackwood. The child she gave up for adoption when she was 19, long before she ever met you, Arthur, and as of this morning, the sole verified biological heir to the Blackwood Legacy Trust. She is the new owner of 51% of Blackwood Logistics. The name hung in the air, a final, incontestable fact. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Eleanor's daughter, the true heir." Chloe's face, which had been a mask of raw confusion, crumbled. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow-motion collapse. Her mouth opened and closed, but the shrill, demanding voice was gone. All that came out was a small, dry gasp, like a puff of dust. She looked at Dr. Reed, this quiet, intelligent woman in her medical scrubs, and her mind just broke. The intricate web of lies, of manipulation, of long-term planning, of entitlement, it all snapped in a single instant. This woman's mere existence was a reality Chloe could not fit into her world. "No," she whispered. It wasn't a denial. It was a plea for the world to make sense again. "No, you're lying. This is a trick. Arthur, you hired her." She pointed a trembling finger at Evelyn. "She's an actress. You hired an actress. This is conspiracy. It's fraud." Her voice climbed the scale, becoming high and thin, the sound of a violin string pulled to its breaking point. "We'll sue you. We'll sue all of you. We'll demand a test. "That won't be necessary, Mrs. Blackwood," Robert said, his voice quiet but freighted with the cold finality of an executioner. Dr. Reed was located by Mrs. Blackwood herself over 6 months ago. They met, they reconciled, and they coordinated this entire legacy transition. The DNA confirming Dr. Reed as Eleanor's biological daughter has already been certified and is attached to the will. It's ironclad. There is nothing to fight. That was the final blow. The word ironclad. Chloe's wild-eyed panic just deflated. All the fight, all the venom, all the ambition that had defined her entire being just evaporated in a single, ragged exhale. She sank into her chair, not sitting but collapsing, as if her bones had turned to jelly. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders beginning to shake. But this wasn't the sound of grief. It was the dry, ugly, racking sob of pure, absolute loss. The sound of a gambler who had bet everything on a sure thing only to watch the house take it all. She had lost the money, lost the company, lost her future. She was nothing. And Ethan, my son, hadn't moved. He hadn't reacted to Dr. Reed's entrance at all. He was still locked in that first moment of devastation, the moment he learned the woman he worshipped was not his mother. He was simply gone. He rocked back and forth in his expensive chair, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring at the glass wall behind me. He was whispering, but not to us, to himself. She wasn't. My mom. It wasn't real. He was a 40-year-old man, a COO, a husband, and in that moment he was just a terrified little boy lost in a forest he didn't understand. His world hadn't just been taken from him, it had been revealed as a lie he had lived for 40 years. Chloe had lost her fortune, Ethan had lost his very soul, they were destroyed, and the war was over. The aftermath wasn't swift, but it was absolute. Justice, I've learned, is not a lightning bolt. It is a slow, grinding machine. The civil suit to recover the stolen $1.5 million was a given. Robert filed it before Chloe and Ethan had even left the parking garage. But that was just the beginning. As promised, Robert turned the entire meticulously prepared case over to the district attorney's office. Criminal charges were filed within the month: grand larceny, conspiracy to defraud, and multiple counts of wire fraud. Facing prison time and with every bank account frozen, Chloe's true nature took over. There was no loyalty, no we. She turned on Ethan with the savagery of a cornered animal, filing for divorce immediately, claiming she was the coerced victim of a weak-willed husband. Their divorce was a short, ugly war between two drowning rats, ending with her walking away with nothing but her own legal bills. The house in Aspen and the Porsche were seized and liquidated by the company to partially cover the stolen funds. She was left exactly as she started, with nothing but her own poison and a pending criminal record. Ethan was a different story. He was a broken man. He didn't fight. He pleaded guilty to every charge, his confession a quiet, pathetic whisper in the courtroom. He had lost his mother, his wife, and his entire identity in the span of a few weeks. He had nothing left to lie for. Given his full cooperation and perhaps a quiet plea for leniency from a father to the DA, the judge was soft on him. He avoided prison. He was sentenced to 5 years probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and a court-ordered restitution plan that he would likely be paying for the rest of his life. He lost his job, his money, and his name. He was forced at 40 to get a menial job in a logistics warehouse, finally learning what real work felt like on his hands. It wasn't a victory, it was just consequences. The board was satisfied. The cancer had been cut out, and the company was safe. A few months passed. Winter had given way to a cool, hopeful spring. I found myself walking the grounds of the Blackwood Logistics Depot, the rumble of trucks a familiar, comforting sound. But I wasn't alone. Walking beside me was Dr. Evelyn Reed. She had flown in for the quarterly board meeting. We had been talking, hesitantly at first, but now with more ease. We were two, strangers bound by the ghost of a woman we had both loved in profoundly different ways. "She would have been so proud of you, you know," I said, my voice a little rough. "What you do, saving lives." Evelyn smiled, a small, sad smile that looked so much like Eleanor's, it made my heart ache. "She told me she was proud of you," Evelyn replied softly. "She said you were the only man she'd ever known who had built an empire with his own 2 hands and kept his soul." I had to stop a wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. Evelyn stopped with me, her gaze kind. She had no intention of running the company. Her work, her calling, was at the hospital. We had agreed with the board to hire a new professional CEO, while she would serve as the new chairwoman, protecting her mother's legacy from afar. She was the smart one, I finally managed to say. She planned all of this. She saved her company, and I think she saved me, too. Evelyn looked at the big blue Blackwood Logistics logo on the side of the warehouse. "She saved all of us, Arthur," she said. "She gave us a chance to build something new, something based on the truth." I looked at her, my daughter, this incredible woman I was just beginning to know. The grief was still there, a dull ache that would never fully go away. But for the first time in a long time, it wasn't the only thing I felt. I felt peace. I felt hope. Eleanor's legacy wasn't just in steel and concrete. It was right here, standing beside me, and it was just getting started. This story teaches us a powerful lesson. A legacy built on deceit and entitlement is a house of cards, destined to collapse. True strength isn't just in what you build, but in the wisdom to protect it. Eleanor's ultimate power wasn't just her incredible capacity for forgiveness 40 years ago, but her clear-eyed understanding that the truth, however painful, is the only foundation that endures. Greed and betrayal may have their moment, but they will always be unmasked by the cold, hard facts, proving that integrity is the only inheritance that truly matters. What do you think was Eleanor's most powerful move? Her incredible act of forgiveness 40 years ago, or her brilliant final move in the will? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe that truth always finds a way, please like this video and subscribe for more stories like this. Yeah.